Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard, and welcome to the Fates Voyage Beyond Runeterra Open Top 64 Breakdown. I know this was just kind of a for fun event, but it's still a Runeterra Open, still want to talk about it. And it happened in the same format as the World Championship, which is always interesting to dive into a little bit. Not a whole lot of comparisons that you can draw, but I think one of the big things players want to talk about is last year, what deck was missed by the world's competitors. And a lot of people brought up Acolytes. This year, I think Elder Formidables is kind of the safe bet, is like things that the world's players didn't really see coming. So, when we look at our top 5 globally, we're taking a look at Elder Formidables, Voltron Elusives, Elder Nora, and Inquisitor Mordekaiser. And you can see the breakdown for the Elusives here. The P and Z is mostly Teemo Yuumi. Then we have the Freljord Zed Ionia. And then there was one Targon and one Shadow Isle Elusive player. So that's the breakdown of that. And then Voltron Elusives, of course, being Fizz Yuumi, like we saw Chenia get second place with at the World Championship main event. So generally, when we're looking at the number one deck for an event, we're looking for around 90 to 100. That's kind of like the average of what you're going to get out of your number one deck. So being at 80, we're already at a little bit, we know that we're going to be at a little bit more of a spread out meta. And that kind of makes sense. One of the big reasons being that you can't cleanly run Elder Formidables and Mordekaiser in the same lineup. A couple players did anyway, but it's definitely not common. And I think players fighting for a spot between one of these in their lineup really brought down the top end of the meta a lot. Now, I knew Elusives were good. I didn't know Elusives were that good. Didn't know they were that good. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we dive into like specific lineups on how players wanted to pair these with their Elder Formidables or, whatever it was. And then Elder Nora, just like, I'm not in love with this deck. I don't know if anyone's in love with this deck, but it is a solid option, especially a solid third option. Right. And of course, like Karma Set and Io Seraphine coming in right behind it, also very solid options. So when we scroll down a little bit, we'll find, we're not going to get too deep into all of this. We'll go shard by shard for some of the more nitty gritty stuff. But like Heimer Jace is still showing up. Aatrox Vayne showed up a little bit more. Players running Morgana in that, or Quinn. All three of these lurk were APAC. I don't know why APAC like lurk so much. But as you can see, like when we're looking at things that had at least 3 pilots on a single shard, we're still charting a lot of the decks. In fact, there were not a lot of one-ofs here, which we'll get into in a second because there's a fun fact about that. This is the regional breakdown for this. If you just want to take a look at this to digest it, I don't know why Reddit does charts like this. I wish there were lines in between all of these, because when you're making the post, there's lines in between all of these. I don't know why these are all off center. Like I thought I set the thing for the whatever. Anyway, my gripes with Reddit aside, Runeterra still coming in and dominating. Bandle City coming in a close second because so many aggro decks are Bandle City. When we look at like Elusives, all of these are PNZ and Bandle City. I believe the Targon was also Bandle City. It might have been PNZ though. And Shadow Isle, I also don't remember. But we also like that. Voltron Elusives are all Bandle City. Elder Nora is Bandle City. Jinx is Bandle City. Sorry, I forgot I was talking about like aggressive decks. So like Voltron Elusives, Go Wide Elusives, and Bandle City Jinx are obviously all Bandle City. And then there is a bit of a hard fall off when we're looking for another Bandle City deck, period. But because so many of them were in the top half of the meta, that's why we have like a really big Bandle City representation. Again, EMEA, as we saw in the year-end wrap-up video, tends to be a little more inclined towards Bandle City. And then Shurima gets another big fat 0 from the Americas, just like it did for the year-end wrap-up video. So it's nice to see some things consistent from 2023 into 2024. Some things about the event itself, because, I might as well just, like, I already wrote out these fun facts for Reddit. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm not, like, there's no point in me having them on a separate monitor. I'll just read them off the Reddit post, right? So Inquisitor, Mordekaiser, and Elder Nora are the 2 decks that had their top 5 spot at both events. Okay, this is all related to the World Championship. This isn't as interesting. One thing I did want to talk about is this one. The winning lineups are rather similar, with Elder Nora, Io Seraphine, and Voltron Elusives all winning 2 events. So when we look at this, we have Elder Nora and Io Seraphine for Maikedo, and then his unique deck was Inquisitor Mordekaiser. When we go to EMEA with Shrelio, Voltron Elusives, Io Seraphine, and then Bandle City Jinx was their unique deck, and then in APAC it was Frosty Bear, again Elder Nora, Voltron Elusives, and then Karma Set is their unique deck. And I've talked to some players who want to just lump Karma Set and Io Seraphine together under like Set PNZ, in which case we'd have even less unique decks, but yeah, again, just like we know that Elder Nora is a solid tournament option, Io Seraphine's a solid tournament option, Voltron Elusives, not as long-standing, not as solidified in its tournament position, but was definitely one of the decks of this event. And so not too surprised to see it picking up 2 wins. And then we don't even get anything like too crazy out of the unique deck from each competitor, right? Bandle City Jinx, Karma Set, Inquisitor Mordekaiser. These are all things. I don't think anyone's like too surprised to see the decks that actually went through and won some of these events. Now, AM only had 4 one-ofs in the top 64, which is not just the lowest amount we've ever had for a top 64, but almost the lowest amount ever. The lowest ever was 3 one-ofs in the top 32 of the Beyond the Bandlewood seasonal, and so it's not really fair to compare like top 64 to top 32, but, you know, this is a very, very low number of one-ofs, and I think this is one of the lowest unique decks that AM has ever seen. And then when we just get into like the rest of them, like 35 unique decks from EMEA, 40 from APAC. APAC tends to be on the higher end. AM and EMEA usually fight for like the low end of that one. Sundisk got second place in EMEA. That's kind of whatever. Well, like it's not whatever. Like it's cool to shout out, right? And it's actually Renekton and Azir. So, you know, Sundisk with three glories call, which, you know, when this card got buffed, I think that made a lot of people look at Sundisk again. But with how weak Shurima has been lately, it is a little surprising to see like mono Shurima come in here. But the one thing I did want to talk about is like the most unique lineup that I found was in EMEA. It was triple Bandle City from Just a Taco 6. Yes. So triple Bandle City. We're looking at Elder Yordles. Normally when you see Yordles, it's Teemo Kale or like Fizz Kale or some Yordle champion and Kale. But here, instead, Zolani the Bloodweaver, which obviously you still get out of Targon, which is why that's usually a Targon list. But, you know, wanted to run Sign-In, Thousand Tails, and Genevieve Elmhart. And Condense coming in as a 3-of to try and take advantage of some of these larger units as well is pretty cool. So that was rather unique. And then, again, like, we get Bandle City, Mordekaiser, Viego. Now, Bandle City, Mordekaiser is not a wholly new idea. We did see Nora Mordekaiser a little bit at the World Championship. But still running all of the portal cards and then just saying, nah, I don't need Nora. It's actually a Viego deck, despite the fact that there's no Invasive Hydravine, still just going for the Camivore Soldier. And honestly, I like this. I like being able to separate the Nora package from the Nora herself and go for that. Also prioritizing Minimorph over Vengeance, just something to point out. And then the third deck to finish all of this off is BC Firespitter. So Firespitter is a naming convention that I use for decks that, like, aggressively postured decks that are running Enraged Firespitter and Might. So if you ever see me put Firespitter in a title, because I know Firespitter's a generic card, right? Like, Elder Dragon decks love to run Firespitter. But Firespitter as a name refers to 3 Firespitter, 3 Might. And we've got a bunch of different region combinations for that, so that's kind of why I'm using it as a naming convention for now. Usually they're Riven decks, but they're not always Riven decks. Like Firespitter Pirates is like Neela Misfortune, but they're running 3 Might and 3 Firespitter, so they fall under the Firespitter category. But yeah, triple Bandle City, and none of the sort of normal Bandle City decks, right? Like, if you told me triple Bandle City, I would have expected, like, Jinx Kennen plus Freljord Elusives, or Voltron Elusives, plus, like, some weird Bandle City deck is the third one. Instead, no, just a Taco coming in with 3 unique ones, and then the most unique deck that I saw, this one hurt my head. I was sitting here staring at it for way too long. It was actually Yada 64. Anytime you see me do champion, when it's 3 of them, just know that I failed to classify this. So I come in here and I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, yeah, Teemo Caitlyn, Sejuani, it's Bandle City, Freljord. Obviously, this is a puff cap deck. You even see like the Charlatan Fishmonger to be like, okay, yeah, that's a puff cap deck. And then you start looking for like the other puff cap cards, and you realize there aren't any. And you're like, oh, it's not a puff cap deck. It's just Teemo. Caitlyn's here too. So, like, you run the trap champions, but then you don't run any trap cards outside of Charlatan Fishmonger, which is more of a trap supporter than, like, an actual trap card. Then you just have, like, the top deck buff package of Omen Hawk, Yadulski, and Glacial Saurian. So, like, okay, what are we buffing the top of our deck for? And then you realize that, like, there's really not much else in the deck. Piltover Castaway is sort of the only other 3 of. So then you're like, okay, let's look at the spells. And it's, like, some protection spells, some burn, and then 3 Wild's Claw Ferocity. And I'm like, okay, you know? It's not an Overwhelm deck, because generally when we classify things as Overwhelm, it's due to the density of Overwhelm units within the list, and it's like, okay, you run Glacial Saurian and then Wild's Claw Ferocity. So, like, you have some Overwhelm, and you have some Burn, and then you have, like, some Puff Cap, and you're running Fishmonger so that you can draw your Burn a little bit more effectively, but you're also, like, it's a weird deck. And I think what I'm going to do, try and farm some content out of this, is like I'll probably do a gauntlet run or even 2 with the lineup, and then I'll play a bunch of ladder games with the deck, and that's how we'll make YouTube videos. I also hate that it shows my Twitter picture here. I wish I could get rid of that. So that is like the event as a whole. When we break down what happened shard by shard in terms of top 5, we can see that like there's a big tie for 5th place in the Americas, with Annie Jin, Elder Nora, Overwhelming, and Inquisitor, or sorry, APAC. Annie Jin, Elder Nora. Oh, this is their 6th place. Sorry. I thought we were on Americas. Americas does have a big tie for 6th place, which is why I was a little confused as to what we were looking at. Yeah, we can start in APAC. Elder Formidables, Voltron Elusives, Karmaset, Bandle City, Jinx. This is a lot more aggressive than APAC usually is, but it's also a lot more top-heavy than APAC usually is. Generally, APAC will have like the lowest amount for their number one deck, and here I think they were actually the highest for on Elder Formidables, at least. Yeah, they're 29, everyone else is like 27, 24. So that's something we don't usually see out of APAC. All of this aggro is also something we don't usually see out of APAC. So it is nice to see them kind of branching out a little bit, but they did still have the most unique decks, so we still know it's APAC. We head over to EMEA because we might as well go in order. Elder Formidables, Elusives, Elder Nora, Inquisitor Mordekaiser, and Ionia Seraphine with Voltron Elusives right outside. So it is nice to look at the regional differences between Elusives, where it's like EMEA really valued the other Elusives over the Voltron Elusives. And when we look at just like Teemo Yumi versus Fizz Yumi, it's only one more Teemo Yumi than Fizz Yumi. But again, we're lumping in the Zed stuff as well because it's basically just an iteration of like OG Omen Elusives. Then when we go over to the Americas, you can see that we were a lot higher on Voltron Elusives, where even though we're lumping, PNZ and Z together, we're still higher on Voltron specifically. And then when we just take a look at the top deck as a whole, Elder Formidables, Voltron Elusives, Inquisitor Mordekaiser, Elder Nora, and then we have a three-way tie for fifth with Overwhelm, Karma Set, and Elusives. Now, Overwhelm is a little bit higher than I expected it to be, but I believe that's just an Americas thing. You can see it down here at like number 8 or number 9 in EMEA, and then even lower down here in APAC. It's one of the ties for 6th place. But APAC just had like really low numbers at the top end across the board, where it's like you can see Bandle City Jinx makes their top 5, but they have less Bandle City Jinx than they do in EMEA. So, thought that was a little interesting. Outside of that, I don't think there's too much more that like I really want to talk about for this event. Oh, there is actually. So Elder Formidables. Elder Formidables and Mordekaiser are sort of like, they're the two big talking points of the format at minimum, right? And so when we look at the lineups that are paired with Elder Formidables, they're kind of all over the place. You'll get like Voltron Elusives and Overwhelm here. And then here you trade out the Voltron Elusives for Annie Jin. And then you trade out the Overwhelm for War Mothers. And it just kind of goes on and on, where there was not a lot of sameness amongst the Elder Formidable lineups, and I think that threw a lot of people off and made the competition a little bit more diverse. But the one lineup that we did see most often coming out of Elder Formidables is pairing it with Voltron Elusives and Karma Set. And what this does to a Mordekaiser player specifically is Mordekaiser player has to look at this and go, okay, my Mordekaiser beats the Elder Formidables, it does not beat Karma Set, and it does not beat Voltron Elusives. The problem is then, did you bring a lineup to wholly beat Elder Formidables? And the answer is probably no, in which case you are going to have to ban the Elder Formidables, even though your Mordekaiser is good into it, but then your Mordekaiser just gets 2-0'd. You can't have that happening, right? So what do you have to do instead? You have to ban one of these other decks. Let's just say you ban the Karma Set, right? And then your third deck is like fine into Voltron Elusives, or like winning into Voltron Elusives. You're now in a little bit of a coin flip scenario, where you need to pair your Mordekaiser into the Elder Formidables. Because if game 1, you queue up Mordekaiser and your opponent pairs up Voltron Elusives, then your Mordekaiser gets stomped, and now your third deck is probably losing to Formidables, right? And if things do go your way, then you get to pair Mordekaiser into Elder Formidables, beat that, lose to this on your second deck, and then beat Voltron Elusives with your third deck. And I think that kind of coin flipping happened a lot, and that's why that's just kind of what the matchup between the Mordekaiser and the Elder Formidables kind of shook out to be. I am still surprised at how little Mordekaiser there was. But again, like, because you can't really run Elder Formidable and Mordekaiser together, I just thought that more players that weren't on Elder Formidables would be on Mordekaiser, but it looks like most people were just like, I'm not going to touch either of these with a 10-foot pole, and I'm going to just go in a completely different direction. And that's kind of what we saw. But, when we take stock of both of these, if we assume that, like, you weren't running these together, and there was 1 or 2 players that were, then that's still 43 out of 64 players that are running some either the Mordekaiser or the Elder Formidables, and that's just in the Americas. When we pop over to EMEA, we actually go up to, it's 40 out of 64, and then over in APAC, I think it's actually really low. It's like 37, because they're just not big on Mordekaiser over in APAC. But I think that, like, that's going to make up a big chunk of the meta, right? And then it's kind of a question of, like, okay, if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? And there's still a bunch of options. We can see, like, Cephalopod wasn't running either Mordekaiser or Elder Formidables, and just didn't run, like, Morgana or Mordekaiser or Elder Dragon at all. Came in with a couple of aggressive options, and then, like, Ionia Seraphine to round it out, because it's a very solid tournament staple. We can see, like, Annie Jin, SI Fire Spitter, PNZ Elusives. That's much more of, like, an aggro-y lineup. And I believe this is the only SI Fire Spitter that we saw. This was, like, Gwen something. Yeah, Gwen Riven. The more traditional, as we can see here, like, Triple Might, Triple Fire Spitter. Like, this is sort of like the OG Fire Spitter deck, at least for Standard. But yeah, that's kind of how things shook out. We had some players go for Mordekaiser and Formidables. I think it was not Machado. It was someone in our top cut in the Americas in like the top 16. Here it is. O Miyamoto. Okay. I knew it was something with an M. O Miyamoto went Elder Formidables, Inquisitor Mordekaiser, and Jack Sorin. This was Morgana Mordekaiser, and then this was Garen over Morgana in the Elder Formidables, and then rounding it out with Jack Sorin, I believe. That's like one of 2 Jack Sorin in the tournament. How many Jack Sorin did we have in the Americas? Well, I screwed up somewhere. We're going to have to fix that. 5 is, however, so it's so embarrassing that I'm catching this live that I actually, so like clearly there's a Jack Sorin in the tournament, right? But as you can see, it's not here on the one of, so that's going to make another one of for the Americas. And then I have to figure out where on this I added an extra deck, but 5 is still the lowest. And like, so I said like 4 is the second lowest, right? And then 4 is the lowest for a top 64, second lowest overall. The next lowest was like 8. So like 5 still breaks the record, right? At least the record's still intact. It's just a matter of how intact it is. But I'll take care of that off camera. I want to end the video now. I don't want to do anything after that. It's so embarrassing that I got it live. Oh, man. But yeah, that's the breakdown. That's kind of why... Oh, jeez. Man, this really, like, killed the recording. Holy shit. I don't even know how to wrap up the video anymore. Like I said, I'll do videos on the most unique lineup and the most unique deck with, like, ladder games and, like, a gauntlet run, and expect that on the channel later this week. I'm turning off the camera now.